Moderna has started testing its COVID-19 vaccine on children younger than 12. The Kid Cove study, as it's known, will determine how well Moderna's shots work and how safe it is for children as young as 6 months old. The company plans to test it on more than 6,700 kids. So for more on this trial, I want to bring in Dr. Dyan Hes. She is the founder of Gramercy Pediatrics. So happy to have you on this day where we're learning about these the Moderna trials. So I imagine when trials extend to children, even babies, there are even more restrictions, more eyes watching. Are these trials going to be any different for the kids than they had been for the adults?
Well, the information has been quite tight-lipped about this, but I do believe that they'll probably be seeing these children quite frequently, like maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. I know that a lot of the participants in these studies are the children of physicians because they have access to the hospitals. They're coming to the hospital frequently already to go to work, so it's easier for these scientists or physicians to bring their kids back for these really frequent amount of testing.
Dr. Hes, a national poll by Michigan Medicine found that 46% of parents say their teenager has shown signs of a new or worsening mental health condition since the pandemic started last year. Parents of teen girls were more likely to report symptoms than parents of teen boys. What do you make of these findings? Are they surprising?
They're not surprising at all. Just actually before I put my phone in the tripod, I got another message from a family that's living out of town that they cannot find a therapist for their son, and he's acting out extremely badly at home. Not in school, he's in hybrid school as much, but when he comes home with his siblings, a lot of frustration, no sports, he has a lot of energy. Like, he's the kind of kid who played soccer and baseball and swimming, and all that's gone. And the other problem is the thought of having another hour of Zoom to do telehealth for like a 12-year-old is quite difficult. So, these are problems we're facing, and you have to remember also most mental health is not covered for children. So it's cash, it's out of pocket, and it's extremely expensive. For me as a mom, I don't know, it's a catch-22 because my kids are so sick of Zoom, and to be on Zoom for another 45 minutes with a stranger after school and after you've been like 7 hours in front of a screen, is that really the kind of therapy we need? I think we need in-person therapy again, and I think we need some kind of grants to support these children because like $400, $500 a visit for initial evaluation and then $250 a pop afterwards. No, most parents can't afford this.
You know, I thought it was really good that you gave the example of a family with a boy, based on what Vlad said about families with daughters are seeing it more. But I thought to myself, boys don't always show it the same way that we expect. And maybe they show that they're struggling by being disruptive. They're less likely to come up to their parent and say, I'm not feeling really good. And then the other thing that I thought of is how do you, not just me, actually, my producer, I got to admit, how do you find a therapist? I don't even know what the process would be to find a therapist for your child, particularly if you've moved out of the city.
Yeah, so there's many organizations that do have therapy right now. For one that takes insurance, probably the average wait is 6 months for a visit. The parent that I just spoke to is on a wait list at several centers, and yet again, those are all Zoom. And then I have another child who was went from an A student, a girl, she's a 5th grader, to like barely a C student this year. Had almost no middle school in New York City. And I said to the dad, why don't you call the school counselor? That would be a good place to start. And he said, oh, she has so many cases. Like, she can't even call us back. Like, it's so busy.
Wow.
It's really sad. Mm-hmm.
Tough.
That is very, very sad. And let me ask you about this, Dr. Hes. Our partners at the BBC report that a study is underway in Northern Ireland to look at a possible link between type 1 diabetes and COVID-19. Some doctors have noticed an uptick of new cases of diabetes during the pandemic, and a review of data published in the journal Diabetes, Obesity and Metabolism found that 14% of patients hospitalized for severe COVID-19 later developed diabetes. That is troubling, and it also just sort of goes to show something we've been talking about for a year now, which is we probably have just begun to scratch the surface of long-term medical health conditions that will come about to people that have been infected by COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. So with that study, you have to remember, 14%, most of those patients were hospitalized. Who gets hospitalized? Usually very sick adults who have obesity. So we know obesity is the #1 risk factor for COVID. So when you're obese, you're already predisposed to COVID. Then the treatment for COVID in the hospital, these patients who've been there for long term, is steroids, dexamethasone. And we know that dexamethasone makes your blood sugars go out of whack. They go way over 200 most of the time. So is it that these patients were already predisposed to COVID, they got long-term treatment with dexamethasone, and bam, they have COVID. But in children, we're also seeing children who did not have diabetes, who were healthy, had COVID, and then all of a sudden their beta cells stopped making insulin. So that's type 1 diabetes. So we're going to really have to differentiate. It seems like people are getting a combination of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So type 2 is adult onset. Type 1 is usually childhood onset. So the data is going to have to really be sought through. But we do know with autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes that any kind of viral infection can bring about something that you might have had the epigenetics to be. You might have developed diabetes anyway, but now you just developed it sooner.
Doctor, I want to ask you about something that's unrelated to COVID-19. A scientist in Hong Kong has developed a retina scanner that can identify early childhood autism. If this is true, as a pediatrician, I imagine you would think this would be a game changer. We know how important early diagnosis and early intervention is. What is your take on this?
So I read the article you sent me, and I wasn't as excited as I think I wanted to be, because the average age of the child in the study was 13 years old. And if you're diagnosing somebody with autism at 13, you've missed the boat. I think the youngest was age 6.
Completely.
So they might have retinal changes, but we know as pediatricians, I mean, we see our patients back. We have the American Academy of Pediatrics has this program called Bright Futures, and we see the patients back 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 15 months, 18 months. So we see them very frequently. And this is not only for vaccines, but this is for developmental delays. If you don't diagnose autism by age 3, probably by age 2, you've already missed that time to get the intense therapy that you need to fix those synapses, those neurological connections, to make these children less agitated, more receptive, calmer. So that's why they do ABA. That's why they have all these different therapies, early interventions. So diagnosing at age 6, in my opinion, you already knew your child was autistic. You just didn't want to accept that fact.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think the thing with autism sometimes is that there isn't a test like there is for, other, I guess, disabilities or other challenges. And so
Yes.
some people really need to see that test. They can't just look at a
Yes.
series of behaviors. But, you're spot on that, kids on the spectrum, you can if you're paying attention, you can probably tell as early as 2, which is great because there's so many options available.
Exactly.
Really interesting. Dr. Dyan Hes, always great to have you. Thank you very much for your insight, your analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good week.
You too.
Bye.